Welcome to Product Mastery Now, where you learn the 7 knowledge areas for product mastery. We teach the product management practices that elevate your influence and create products your customers love as you move toward product mastery. To learn about all 7 areas and assess your strengths in product mastery, go to my website, productmasterynow.com, and click the podcast button at the top of the page. I'm Chad McAllister, a product management professor and your host. Back in episode 468, just like 10 episodes ago, Dr. Merrick Furst introduced us to the discipline of deliberate innovation and how companies can create products customers absolutely must have. The purpose of this podcast is to help you create products your customers love, but products your customers must have takes this to a higher level, and we will be talking more about that again. I asked Merrick to join us once more so we can learn about some of the tools for creating such products and how we might be thinking about that. He also wrote about details of this in the book, The Heart of Innovation, a field guide for navigating to authentic demand. These will be valuable tools for you to improve your work as a product professional. Good reasons to stick through this discussion today. Dr. Merrick Furst is a distinguished professor and the director of the Center for Deliberate Innovation, the CDI, at Georgia Tech. He has also founded numerous startups and, in addition, worked with hundreds of founders and innovators, helping them use the discipline of deliberate innovation. You should be listening also to episode 468 for part 1 of this discussion and his full bio as well. As a reminder, we do create a written summary of our discussions and also a 1-page action guide to help you put into action the key takeaways we'll be sharing. To get those resources, go to productmasterynow.com/478. Merrick, thanks for being back with us.
Hey Chad, it's nice to be here with you. I don't know, here is the right word anymore, but it's nice to be talking to you, connecting with you. And I was just thinking as you're making that intro, how lucky your podcast audience is and how lucky your students are that they would have someone who views himself as a professor of product management and expert in these kinds of things, because the world sure needs you and therefore needs them. So anyway, I'm glad to be here.
I appreciate that. And it is truly a passion. I regard innovation as the engine of businesses and certainly the creator of new revenue. And we need people that know how to do that. And there's not a lot of people. And you're certainly one of those, which is why we are talking.
Well, I don't know if I'm absolutely one of them, but by the way, I was thinking as a product manager, you described me as helping people make products that customers must have or must buy. I wish I could do that. I don't even think I don't know if that's possible or not, but my experience with people, I don't know if it's the same as your experience with people, but it's like my experience with my kids. The minute you think they must do something, that's the thing they're not going to do. And there are all these things that we need to do that we're never going to do. So I don't know that one of the things that I've learned is even thinking in those terms is potentially problematic when you're thinking about products, because there's nothing people must have or must do. But there is this other thing, which I think we talked about last time. Go ahead.
Well, that was my teeing up of that, because I didn't want to talk about it in terms that you do to let you be able to talk about that. So I was alluding to the not product, and I was hoping you would reorientate us to the not product.
Yeah, great. And so the thing that we came to is we were trying to figure out how to help people make things that would actually, let's say, sell, or that people wouldn't be indifferent to, because that's really the killer, is you make things and people don't care. And the problem is if they're indifferent, which means that not buying is okay, or which means that other things that they're doing is okay. That's really a problem. Another way of thinking about not buying being okay, is that what you're really saying is it's that they have other things they can do instead. It might be a way of saying it. So what we've learned is what you're really looking for when you're building product, or you're trying to find a way to have authentic demand for what you do, is that somehow in the situation where your product shows up, the alternatives are just not okay, which means that not using it or not buying it is not okay. And because as long as there are alternatives that are okay, then you can't really be confident that what you have is the thing that they're going to reach for. And that's hard for people to see, because usually when they're focusing on product, they're trying to focus on the thing that they think people need, or the thing they want, or the thing that will delight them. And focusing on that is not problematic, except for the fact that people might love your product, but they have other things they can do too. So what difference did it make that they loved your product? Or what difference did it make that they needed your product if they're going to not do the things that they need to do? to think more clearly as a product manager, as a person who's trying to build something of value. It helps. It seems our experience is that it helps a lot to try to think in these other terms. This is what we call not principle, this not terms.
Hmm.
And the way we say it is, what makes something an authentic demand is there's a situation in which a person, a customer, finds themselves, and in that situation, not buying is not okay, or not using the product is not okay. And if you can help train yourself to think in those terms, you start to see people a little bit differently, and you see how situations are a little bit differently.
It is a very different perspective to think about that, right? And if we get to the point where we can make such products, then obviously we're serving customers at a higher level. There was another statement, and you gave an example last time we talked.
Let me
Sure.
just say, I actually, if you make a product that's successful, then you have made a product in which the alternatives to using it are not okay. Because it's just logically true. That's what I like about these kind of statements is I'm trying to not say things that just sound right. I'm trying to say things which are from first principles,
Mhm.
verifiably right. So if you make a product that people are using, I can tell you for sure that the alternatives are not being used. And so there's something not okay about them. I
Mhm.
don't know what that is. So it's unavoidable to go down this not path. I'm just trying to give you a more direct path to get there, which is think about the nots as opposed to trying to think about the positive things. Sorry, keep going, Chad.
No, quite good. Yeah, I like this phrasing that you shared. It's new to me for sure. The not product, and the thing that stuck with me from the previous discussion too is if you give a customer the opportunity to not buy, and they don't buy, obviously this is not a not.
It's weird, right? It's just obviously true, and it's so hard to get people to recognize the truth of it. We're also, in some ways, deeply desperate to have people care about what we do, or people not be indifferent to us. That even though it's obviously true that if someone could not buy, they're not really a customer, people are very not okay saying to a customer just that, okay, I have this thing, I'm thinking about doing this thing, and if I do it, is it okay for you to not buy it?
Mhm.
And the truth is, you really need to know the answer to that, because if it's okay for them to not buy it, then you shouldn't make it. And it's hard to hear, but you do need to hear it. So that's an example of a tool already I'm hoping is helpful. And you ask people like, would it be helpful for you? Would it be good for you? Could you see yourself using it? I think those are in some ways relatively useless questions. They don't actually reveal to you the kind of thing that you need to know, which is it okay for them to not use it?
Right. Yeah, I think it's a good question for me
Yeah.
to add to customer interviews. So
Yeah,
good.
if you do, would you share with me how it works for you? I, what I'll say to you is, it's actually hard to ask that question.
Hmm. Yeah.
And in the moment, the customer is going to look at you in a certain way, and you're going to feel a little funny in your stomach, and you might be surprised at how hard it is to ask that question.
As we went down this path, we got to a point where I felt like we needed to talk about implementing some tools to help us think through deliberate innovation. How can we create these products that are an authentic demand? And there was something you brought up as we were talking at the end about the waking dream might be something we should talk through. So I don't know, so that
Yeah,
might be a good
I'd
thing
love
to
to do
go
that.
through just to prod a path here.
Okay, so by the way, I should ask you, so, what would be wrong if we didn't talk about the waking dream? I'm just using the own techniques. I'm curious what it is that it means to you that we're talking about the waking dream. But
Uh,
we don't have to go down the path. Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, as I have no context, perhaps nothing, but because you teed it up before, I now have interest
Got it.
that I want to know about this.
Okay. Well, we could spend more time on that. But so here's where the notion of a waking dream showed up in our work. We would work with innovators or product people or founders, and they would describe to us why it was what they were doing was going to be meaningful to the customers. And
Mm.
they would say things like a customer said they wanted to save money, or they would say that the customer has the following use case, or they would have all these explanations of why they would become rich, or why they would make their bosses happy by pursuing this particular product direction. And we start to realize that there's a way in which it's a little bit, what we saw when we dug into it was what was actually happening is that the people we were talking to had an idea about how the world worked, that what we call the waking dream. It's like they're living in some world where they think they know who their customers are, they think they know how their customers are making decisions, they think they know how their customers are living, they think they know what their product means to the customer. There's this like waking dream. And the reason it's kind of like a waking dream is it just feels real. And what's funny about this waking dream is that when you're in it, it feels like you know things and you don't feel like you're wrong. You just feel like you're right. And because you feel like that's the way things are, you operate as though that's the way the world actually is. And what we saw people doing is that they were making products that fit into the waking dream. In their people's heads, they could see people using it, they could see people buying it, they could see people telling other people about it. It all made sense. Like it really did. The products would really save time. The products would really be better than what they're currently doing. The products would really go on the shelf. All those things. The problem is most often when people would actually get those products constructed and they would put them in the real world just didn't care. The real world was indifferent. So the products had the property that they worked in the waking dream world, they just didn't work in the real world. Which led us to wonder, well, what is this waking dream? How is it that people are walking around in this waking dream and not noticing it's a waking dream until all of a sudden they discover that people don't care about their product? In which case they start to try to figure out like what did they get wrong and what features should they add, and maybe they charge too much, and they make up all these other stories about why it doesn't work. But the reason it doesn't work is because they made a product that's not of the real world. And once you start to notice that, you start to see that, first of all, it's annoying because you discover people have these fantasies and you can't move them off their fantasies, which I guess is good in one sense because it makes them build things. But it's bad in this other sense. The stuff that they make isn't necessarily going to fit into the real world. That led us to start to wonder, like, what we're really saying is that people are wrong, and then they're discovering they're wrong, and that feels bad. And so then there's a wonderful book, by the way, called Being Wrong by a woman named 𝐸 Schultz. I highly recommend it. She's a wonderful writer, and it's a wonderful book. And when she gives talks about the books, she does this very amusing thing with the audience. She turns to her audience and says to them, what does it feel like when you're wrong? And usually there's like some, I'd say, not reasonable person in the audience who stands up and says, I love being wrong because when I'm wrong, I learn things. And then someone else will say, well, but what's interesting about that is, and then someone else will say, well, I hate being wrong because I just hate the feeling of it. And what's interesting about that is they're answering a different question than she asked. She asked the question of what does it feel like to be wrong? And the question they were answering was, what does it feel like to discover you're wrong? And those are very different. So when you discover you're wrong, it usually doesn't feel so good. But the moment before you discover you were wrong, what did that feel like? And what she says, it does feel like something. What it feels like is being right. And the difficulty of living in the waking dream, which we all do, which we can't really help, is there's no marker to tell you that you're wrong. There's no marker that says, go check. Because the markers that tell you to go check are the markers that show up when you notice that you're wrong about something, then you go check. But if you don't even notice, you have nothing to check. And that's, for me, that I've come to understand that it's a judgment error. That is, we're in situations which are somewhat uncertain, like will people buy your thing? What do people want it to do? What are people saying to you? And in that situation where there's judgments, you're relying on your judgment, and your judgment is the sense of what's true, what's right and what's wrong. And what we've learned from these great psychologists like Kahneman and Tversky and others that developed this field of behavioral economics, what we know is that human beings make errors and judgments in situations of uncertainty. They just do, and they don't notice they're doing them, because if you notice you're doing them, you fix them, but that's the nature of judgment, is you don't notice you made the bad judgment. And it seemed to me, in working with a lot of founders and a lot of innovators and product people, that how many other situations are as uncertain as that about what you should make and what you should do? And it must be the case that people are making judgment errors in that situation. So I started to pay attention to what kind of how people were making those errors, I would say. And when I started to pay attention to that, it just became so weirdly, blindly obvious that almost everybody we were talking to or working with was making judgment errors. And what's interesting about judgment errors is it doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means that you don't know if you're right. And if you don't know if you're right, you might be wrong. And it's an extremely expensive way to discover that you're wrong by building a product and discovering nobody cares.
Right.
So then the question became for us, how could you, if someone's walking around in a waking dream where they think things are true, they think things are right, they think that enough that they make stuff, and then it turns out that it wasn't really the right thing to make. How was that happening, and what could you do about that? And that was the problem with the waking dream. The problem with the waking dream is if you're in it and you can't tell that you're in it, what should you do? Is that helpful with that? I'll take it to the next step, but I want to make sure that's making sense to you.
Yeah, I want to go to the next step. So I get the setup here that we often pursue what we think is a solution to a problem, and it's easy for us to get enamored, the big us, for product people, especially myself coming from an engineering background, get enamored with the solution, and we start
That's
constructing a narrative around the solution, right? And we're shocked, if we care, we're shocked when customers don't agree when we actually get it into their hands, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't remember. It's been a while since we had our last episode. I don't know if I shared the example of this Dumbala story where we had a product that was going to be useful we thought it was useful for eBay, and it was going to solve a fraud problem for them, and I didn't tell you. So 3 people with very technical people, 2 professors and a grad student, came to me and said, let's start a company. We know how to find all the bots on the internet.
I didn't realize it was
Did I
an
tell you that
eBay
story?
connection. Yeah, but fast
Yeah,
forward to
yeah.
the punchline, right?
Oh, well,
Because this was
the
interesting.
punchline is these guys that we knew at eBay said to us it would save them $40 million a year if they had the product. And I told them it would cost them about $150,000 to start to buy it. And they said, go make it. And we went and we made a product. We raised money. We built a company. And the team went back to eBay with it about 6 months later, and the eBay never bought. And what seemed weird at the time, and probably still seems weird now, maybe to listeners, is you have a customer who tells you that it will save them $40 million if they buy your product, and your product is only $150,000 and they don't buy. And the waking dream that the company had was that didn't make any sense, that companies that would save $40 million for a $150,000 cost would obviously buy. And so the company kept asking, well, what does it need to do? And the eBay would say it needs to integrate with this or it needs to do that. And they would keep changing the product, and eBay would never buy. And now what I would say is, well, here's an insight. Nothing in that interaction should lead anyone to think that they'll buy. And why? Well, because I didn't ask the other question, which is it okay not to buy?
Right.
Is it okay not to save $40 million? eBay is like bringing in billions in revenue, and they're on this crazy growth path. And they probably have lots of ways that they could make up $40 million in loss. They could charge another nickel or a quarter per transaction. So yeah, it's not great, but it's okay for them to not save $40 million. And so you see, it wasn't a not. So not buying was actually okay.
Right.
Even though it made sense for them to buy, not buying was okay. And that was how, but because we never thought about the alternative, we never considered the fact that our awakened dream told us that people who are in business will save $40 million every day. That was part of our awakened dream. So,
Right.
so now the question became, okay, yeah, so
Yeah. What's powerful from that story is, one of the experiences that I very much appreciate, because frankly, I had not a positive view of the function of sales, right? As an engineer, we're the ones that actually create a real value for our organization, not thinking that someone would actually sell this. And I found myself in a role that was more aligned with sales engineering and had to work with salespeople and support them and learn sales methodologies because of that. And a clear, demonstrable ROI, right? We would have our ROI calculators and be able to show how our product is going to save you so much money. That is a very standard thought approach, right? Very, very logical to say, of course, this is going to be a success, without taking it to the next step, which I frankly have not seen in the sales methodologies, at least we used, to judge, is it okay for them not to buy? Are there other ways for you to save this ROI besides us?
right. For example, that would be Now, sales is interesting because, in fact, one of the ways that a lot of startups get screwed up is they have a CEO who's a very good salesperson. My guess is that's the case for you, Chad, if you've been trained in sales. If someone gave you a product that wasn't a not, that is left to their own devices, the customer wouldn't pick it up, and you show up in the room with it, you might make it possible for them to not be okay with not buying. For those of you who are familiar with people who have been trained to sell fuller brush or maybe even better encyclopedias door to door,
Yeah, right.
there's
Yeah.
a lot of things that a salesperson in front of some other person can figure out how to make the situation in some ways so uncomfortable to not buy that your
Right.
customers buy. But
Using
that's not the same
persuasion.
as the
Yep.
buying your product. Yeah, it's
Right.
not the same as they're buying your product. And that's very confusing. So if a really good CEO or a really good VP at a company talks to a lot of customers and uses sales skills to get the customer to say that they'll buy something, and then you have the product people make it, and then as long as the VP or the great salesperson's in the room, they buy it. But then you try to hire salespeople to sell it, and it won't sell.
Right.
And what you discover is there wasn't actually authentic demand, but there was a person who was good at getting people to do something in the room, and that's not at all the same. I think a lot of
Mm-hmm.
money is lost around that.
Yep. Okay.
So anyway, so
Yeah.
where were we in this
Yeah.
path?
Take us to the next level
Yeah,
now.
go ahead.
Now we're aware of this problem. How do we take the steps to be in reality and not the waking dream?
Right. So there's two sides to this. One side is to just how do you notice that you're in the waking dream, or how can you help other people notice they're in the waking dream? And I'll tell you here's the problem with doing that, and we have to overcome the problem, and I'll tell you how to overcome the problem. You have to recognize the problem first. The first problem is when you can help people notice that they're in this waking dream, a lot of what that's about is noticing that people actually are indifferent to you. So in the waking dream, very few of us really want to know that what we're doing or what we're offering is not interesting. And if you go talk to a customer and you show them, could we save you $40 million? And they get all excited and say yes. There are a whole bunch of things that are happening there that have nothing to do with saving $40 million. A lot of it has to do with the fact, like when I went to eBay, my friend was there, and my friend knew me, and we were on boards together at various things. We knew each other in ways, and first of all, one of his problems, he has to get me out of his office, and he wants to do that in a way that I don't feel bad. So if he tells me I should go home and make it, man, I felt good leaving his office. It didn't cost him anything. And also, people want to help you. There's this strange thing that happens. It's technically called demand characteristic. I don't know if you've come across it, but if you ask
Mm-hmm.
someone a question, because we're all humans, they know what answer you're looking for. The obvious ways are, on a scale of 1 to 10, how good was my service? Okay, well, people aren't really looking to be told that their service wasn't good, so the question itself often conveys to people, whether you want it to or not, the answer you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So people typically want to be helpful. So without even realizing it, because they want to be helpful, and they've figured out, without even realizing they figured it out, what answer you're trying to get, they'll give you that answer. So a lot of what happens, you have to realize is you're out there trying to figure out whether they can be non-indifferent, because indifference is what you can't really live with, and they keep making you feel like you're not indifferent. So everything's programmed to fool you. So once you start to realize that might be happening, you start to work hard to find out the answer to the question, let me find out, could they be indifferent? Is it okay for them to not buy? Invariably what you discover, or mostly what you discover, maybe you're lucky and you have something that they're not indifferent to start with, but usually you're not. What you discover is, wow, they're actually indifferent. Like all the things I thought they would be not indifferent to, they're actually indifferent. It's okay not to buy. It's okay if I don't solve that problem. It's okay if I don't do this. And man, that's uncomfortable. But it's helpful because at least might take you off the path of wasting time and money on building something otherwise. But what most people are really interested in is how to find something which they're not, how to find something which your customer is not indifferent to.
Right.
But first you really do have to understand what they are indifferent to. A big secret about this, which is a bit counterintuitive, I think, for a lot of people in product who are trying to come up with product ideas, for example,
Mm-hmm.
or trying to mix features, for example, to get value proposition or something like that, is a lot of what we've learned is it's better to be subtractive in your thinking than additive in your thinking. That is, ask yourself the question, if I don't do this, can people be indifferent? And The answer is, if that's true, then you got to do it. And if I do it, can they be indifferent? Is a similar sort of question, a little harder to reason about out loud like this. But what I'm suggesting is you want to look in people's situations who are going to be your customers and ask yourself, what is it about this situation that allows them to be who they are? And usually people are pretty expert in their situations. So you ask yourself, well, what are they in this moment? What do they reach for? Or in this moment, what do they have to have that's there? Or in this moment, what relationships do they have to maintain? Or in this moment, through what channels are they affecting themselves? Those are 4 boxes that we describe somewhat in the book. If you want to see it in writing somewhere, you can get it just as fine watching videos or listening to this. We call that a situation diagram, and you do that for the person who might be your customer, and you do that for the people around them. Okay, if the person is typically like an employee, and that means that they have a boss, and so their relationship is with the boss. Then you ask, okay, well, the boss has to also exist, and what role does the boss play? What role does the employee play in the boss's life? Because that's how the employee remains employed. And you start to draw this diagram out and see these pieces as a product person, and you start to say, okay, what I'm interested in is how can they be currently indifferent to me? Like, how is it they're going about their lives in a way that makes it possible for them to do things without my product? Because that's what you're fighting against. They're perfectly fine the way they are. And mostly what you'll find is they're just fine, thank you. Yes, it would be better to have your product, but a lot of things would make their life better, and so that's not what a not looks like. Now, as you start to do this work, you ask yourself the question, okay, which of these things are they indifferent to, and which of these things are they not indifferent to? Like, I notice they keep scheduling this meeting. Well, all right, so the meeting, maybe that's not so great, but they keep scheduling it. What if I were to suggest to them that they shouldn't schedule that meeting? Do they care, or do they not care? This is a technique, technically it's called breaching. You ask people to change in some way. You either ask them to change, or you try to put yourself in the way of it, or you give them something else to do. You literally have to interact with the potential customer. You can't do this by a survey, for example, because you don't have a name for these things typically. You have to just interact with them and see whether or not they'll let you breach. That is, whether this thing that they're doing right now, whether they can even change it at all. A lot of times when they can't change something, and it's important for you that they change something, you have to then track down, and I'll talk to you a bit about that. You have to track down why it is that this change is not okay for them, because that's what a not indifference looks like. Changing this is not okay. Okay, so I'm saying a lot, but I have to tell you one more sort of meta thing to think about as a product person or as a founder or an innovator that people somehow have trouble just paying attention to. It's not so much what your product does or how it works. What really matters is if in order for your product to work, the customer's behavior has to change.
Mm-hmm.
That's just obviously true. Like whether, even if it's just like buying the exact same thing from you that they buy from somebody else, that's a change in behavior. But there's going to be some behavior change that's necessary, whether it's from the customer or from the person who allocates budget to the user, or there's a whole bunch of people around. There are a bunch of behaviors that would have to change. And your job actually is to see which behaviors have to change, and you have to see whether or not you can create that behavior change. That's what your product does.
Yeah.
Now, and I'm saying this kind of abstractly, but I probably have to make it more concrete for you. So eventually the vision you come to, or the understanding you come to, is I see my customer so clearly that I can see how their current way of going about things has them stuck. And let me tell you what I mean by stuck. Stuck means every way they currently go gets them to a place where they don't want to be. And they may not have a name for it, but they feel stuck. But they can't change their behaviors for some reason. Like they're doing things they know they shouldn't do it. They don't do things that they know they should do. They can't start doing them. A whole bunch of things that are like that. And your value to them, or your product's value to them, is it enables them to change a behavior. So that's what you're looking for when you're trying to create something for which there's authentic demand, is you want to start to see how the situation is set up so that people are constrained to do what they're currently doing and not change. and yet they're drawn to change. And then you figure out how to build a product which allows them to change. And then when you do that, you simply free them to be who they already are. And that's what authentic demand feels like.
Okay. That was very helpful. And I like where we got, and I wish we had time to go into more details, but I'm going to refer people to the Heart of Innovation because we're going to find details there in your book, the field guide for navigating to authentic demand. Where I like that you ended up there with us is there is this tool, this situation diagram. And by the way, is that something I could include in the show notes for this episode? Would you mind if I included the diagram?
No, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. That would be most helpful then. Yeah. And we're thinking through, obviously our product is going to make some change, whatever that product is. Certainly the first thing I thought about was business to business type products, especially enterprise software solutions were changing.
Right.
They require a change in behavior from people. And that's why they resist that.
Every product you introduce requires some behavior change.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Right. You're choosing one thing over another.
For example, or you're asking them to pick something up or not pick something up. Or it's so enlightening to get product people to think about the behaviors that would have to change. Because then you can start to notice the behaviors that aren't changing. Then you can ask, well, how is it that we can make those behavior changes possible for the customer?
Yeah, this is a really interesting dimension to think through about not just customer research, which is my traditional path to understand customers' unmet needs, but this is an added dimension to think about how is the customer's behaviors needing to change to adopt our product, and are they willing to do that? Are they able to do that? Or can we change their product in a way that fits better with the behaviors they could change?
Right. Yeah. This trying to like surveys or ask questions. The problem with that is a sort of fundamental problem, which is you can only ask questions about which you know the names, that you can only talk about things which have names.
Mm-hmm.
And authentic demands don't really have names that we find. Authentic demands are weird insights about situations that people don't even notice themselves. So one of the difficulties is that human beings are opaque to themselves. We do make decisions for various reasons, but they're not things that we notice about ourselves or others. And so if only you could ask people questions to which they knew the answers, that would be great. But they actually don't know the answers, and you don't have names for them. So part of this work that's so exciting actually is when you go and get interested in your customers in this way, you start to see things about them that literally you know them better than they know themselves, because they can't really know themselves in this way. And so I want to invite you to your audience to try this a little bit and see what it's like.
Very good. Thank you for taking us through that. And I'm glad we know about your book. Before we let you go, we do like innovation quotes. And I wanted you to bring one and talk about that. And maybe you want to revisit the one from last time.
Well, I'll say it a slightly different way. It's because now that we've talked for a while, not is part of our vocabulary.
Right.
The innovator or the company the innovator is working for, if you don't care, like if it's okay for you not to make something, that's not really right. So you have to look in yourself and say, what's not okay for you to not do? Or another way of saying it is, if you look at your customers, you keep noticing something about them. So it's not okay for you to not notice this, like that you notice they're wasting money or they're something. So you have to figure out your own not. But it's not enough to know your own not. You have to know the customer's not. Because what's meaningful, and this will sound funny when I say it, but maybe if you play the tape back slowly, it'll sound less funny. It has to be the case that your not is such that your customer's not is that it's not okay for you to not have your not. So it's like what you make and what they get have to align, and the more platitudinal way of saying it, I guess, would be your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. But it's your not, and what their not is their not is that you have your not. When you have that, and by the way, what's nice about that is it's only one idea. So once you get the idea of a not, you can start to see why it isn't working. Like they want you to make something, but you don't want to make it. Well, it's okay for you not to make it. How is that happening? Or you have something that you can't not make, but why is it okay for them to not buy it? So everything is hinging on that. And then weirdly, I know we have all these other product management tools, but weirdly, if you just think this way, you get to answers that are surprisingly more accurate and better, at least in our experience. So I recommend it to you.
Yeah, and the book will help us with deliberate innovation. Again, the title is The Heart of Innovation.
Or get in touch with me.
Yeah,
By the way, you
absolutely.
can get in touch with me
We
too. We're interested in working with founders and innovators and others at the center, and you should certainly listen to Chad. From what I can tell, he has a lot of background and knowledge, so I'm encouraging everyone to pay more attention.
we are trying to bring knowledge to the product management and innovation community. So that's what this podcast is about. And I will make
Okay,
sure
great.
that a link to your LinkedIn profile is in the show notes so people can contact you. And that probably will work pretty well. Any concluding comments?
I would say one thing we didn't do was talk about some of the nots that you have for doing things. And let me ask you, so does this clarify your thinking in any way? Are there some things that change for you in this conversation?
It tickles my thinking, right? It intrigues me. I approach developing products from a customer research perspective, that we want to understand the customer's problem deeply. How do we then design solutions that solve that problem in a way that the customer recognizes value, right? That they say, yes,
Yeah.
I need that, right? This is another dimension for me. So I'm going to listen back through this as well and think through the not a little bit more, and how we need to try to intercept the customer in a way with our product that changes behavior in ways that are reasonable for them, and recognize behaviors that they can't change, and our product cannot demand that if that's the case.
I'd love to, I mean, you have so much experience doing this. I would love to know, if you do it, some products that you've been successful with, that you might go back and look and understand, oh yeah, I can see now that there was a not, like not using it was not okay, and what that not might be, or what your thoughts of it might be. And I'm also curious about products that all of us have made products that people are indifferent to. I wonder if you might think about some of those and ask yourself, was it actually okay for them to not use it? And I just didn't notice that at the time.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Absolutely.
So
Very good.
I think that can be sometimes very telling.
Merrick, I have very much enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dad.
Thanks for doing this again. And listeners, as you know, you'll find the written details of everything we talked about, including a one-page action guide to help you take action, and also maybe have a discussion with your colleagues about these topics at productmasterynow.com/478. As always, keep innovating.
Thank you for listening to Product Mastery Now, where product leaders and managers gain product mastery through practical knowledge, influence, and confidence. By listening, you are becoming a product master, creating products customers love. Find additional resources at productmasterynow.com. Keep innovating.